Hi, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. We uncork them. This week, we are talking about executive orders. The specific ones that we're discussing are the ones related to the Alien Enemies Act, and we have done some of this before. This continuation describes and determines the new Texas case that has come out, a federal case in Texas regarding the Alien Enemies Act and how it relates to political questions. This is a huge constitutional law issue and continuing topic for especially law students, but it goes into real life. And we're going to talk about how that political question applies. Then we're going to talk about the new executive orders related to broadcasting. We're going to talk about the ones issued against the Voice of America, as well as NPR and PBS. So, I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the owner of Tarani Law, LLC, and the CEO of The Law Unscripted. I do business in Maryland, Virginia, and DC, and we publish for The Law Unscripted everywhere. So we're glad that you're joining us. I'm a full-time practicing attorney. I'm a prior prosecutor, a prior defense attorney. Now I mostly focus on civil law and litigation, but I am joined by the preeminent constitutional law and constitution scholar, Dr. John Weil, who is the Dean of the Honors College for Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome back.
Good to be here. I'm so eminent that I can't find my glasses at the moment, but I'm sure they're around here somewhere.
They're around. Okay. Keep looking.
Okay.
We've swapped him up on technology today, so now he's losing everything. He's got the microphone set up and the headphones and now the glasses coming back on.
Maybe.
So
okay.
Yeah, good to have you. And we are, this is really interesting. We have been, and please don't click off. Continue to watch, because we're going to continue our work into the Alien Enemies Act and where it's popping up throughout the U.S. and how different judges are applying this. We have talked about it recently. Last week, we discussed the second set of Venezuelans who were on their way to the airport and then got turned around by another U.S. judge, a federal judge, and this time in the heart of Republican territory. Down in Texas, we've got a new decision. And I think this one raises, not only have we discussed the difference of the powers of the executive branch, legislative, and judicial, but in this case, we're going apart from that is what is the deference? And it's called political question. Dr. Weil, you have been teaching constitutional law for decades. I even took your classes. What is this theory or doctrine of political question?
Well, let's go first to, what is an executive order, which is basically an executive order is a presidential directive, typically on how to enforce existing law. Presumably, an executive order has to have some grounding either in statutes, that is, in specific laws, or in the text of the Constitution. And there's a clause in the Constitution that sort of works both ways, what we call the take care clause, which basically says that the president has the authority, and I guess you'd say the responsibility, to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And the question, so there's a fine line between what is direction to administrative agencies in accord with the law and what is just basically, this is what I want you to do, whether it fits with the law or not.
Right. And in the Constitution, it's specifically divided where the legislative branch makes the law.
That's right.
The president, the executive, enforces the laws, and the Supreme Court, the judiciary, interprets them.
That's right. And that goes all the way back to Federalist number 78, if I remember, the power of the purse, the power of the sword, the power of judgment, sort of three different branches. So what Trump has done is Trump has issued an executive order, and here I guess you'd say he's at least trying to follow, maybe. He's trying to indicate that there's a connection with his order with previous law by evoking what's known as the Alien Enemies Act. This is a law that was adopted in 1798, along with the notorious Alien and Sedition Acts, which are universally regarded today as unconstitutional. But it was issued during the Adams administration at a time of the quasi-war, undeclared war with France, in which gave the president the authority to deport people uh, in a nation with which we were at war, um, and right, or faced an invasion or attack. And
And
so
in this case, is this better known? See how well I've remembered my history. Is this better known as the French and Indian War?
no.
It's
That was
different than that.
yeah, that's a war prior to the American Revolution.
Okay.
This is during the conflict. It comes closer in some sense to the War of 1812 was eventually provoked by what Americans considered to be, British stopping American ships, taking off sailors that they thought had deserted from theirs and taking them back, and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And England and France had embargoes during the reign of Napoleon. They each had embargoes on commerce to the other. So if you were a merchant and you were trading with France, then the English would try to prevent you from doing so. And if you were trading with England, the French would attempt to trade. So this ended up with this quasi sort of naval war. And Trump is saying effectively that we have had an invasion,
Mhm.
that's the term of the law, by foreign gangs, and that to some extent at least, this invasion was coordinated by someone within the government of Venezuela. So
And he's
he's
specifically saying, I mean, yes, there's the general, any gangs, but
right.
especially this Venezuelan gang.
That's right. The something day something or another.
I know I don't speak any
uh,
Spanish. It's awful.
Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua. And maybe
I'm glad you did
mispronouncing.
that.
But yeah, he's essentially equating immigration, illegal immigration to be sure, but illegal immigration to a foreign invasion and saying that he has the right, therefore, to deport people. And this is a case that's been somewhat convoluted because some of these cases originated elsewhere and got to the
Ended up in
Supreme.
Texas.
Right, right. They were, some of these at least were captured in northeastern states and taken down to Texas. And there were two, if I remember, there was another basis. The initial writ that was used to bring the case, the Supreme Court decided no, you can't do it. I think it was Administrative Procedures Act, may have been something else. You can't bring it there, but you can bring it as a habeas corpus petition. And so some people in this district in Texas were able to get a habeas corpus petition. They were about to be deported to Venezuela. That is stopped. And the judge, who, by the way, is let me get his name. He's
I think it's
Hispanic. Rodriguez,
Rodriguez.
right?
Hmm.
I wanted to get his first name there too. I have it here, right at the tip, or so I think. Right, Fernando Rodriguez Jr., U.S. District Judge, and this is a decision that was issued on May 1st, so very, very, very recently. Um, he essentially does what most conservative or people that I would regard as conservative legal theorists do, which is you look at the actual language of the statute
Mm.
and what its common meaning would have been at the time that it was written. And I actually think there's two bases that you could use. One is, there's not actually a war with Venezuela right now. Um,
Not one declared.
right. Well, even undeclared, to my knowledge,
We're not fighting
right,
them. There's
right,
no
right.
weapons or military
But
action.
right, but also there is no invasion by Venezuelans in any traditional sense as it would have been understood at the time. There are people from Venezuela who have come here, some illegally, uh, and if they're gang members, I don't think anybody has any objection to sending them back. Um, but is he using, can he use this law to do it? And the judge basically says, and I want to read a section that I think is very applicable to this and a lot of the executive actions, allowing the president unilaterally to define the conditions when he may invoke the Alien Enemies Act and then summarily declare that these conditions exist would remove all limitations to the executive branch's authority and would strip the courts of their traditional role of interpreting congressional statutes to determine whether a governmental official has exceeded the statute's scope. So, in some ways, this is a case, that part at least, is almost more statutory interpretation than it is constitutional law.
Sure.
But in this decision, and then we'll get back to your earlier question,
Mhm.
this decision does one of the court's objections, one of the government's objections, Trump's objections, was that for the court to intervene would be to would violate what's known as the political questions doctrine. And the
Right.
political questions doctrine basically goes back fairly early. There's mentions of it in Marbury versus Madison back in 1803. The most prominent case is an 1849 case, Luther versus Borden, which, well, actually is well somewhat applicable. It deals with which government in the state is the valid state government.
Okay.
But essentially, the political questions doctrine says that the Constitution has delegated certain powers directly
Mhm.
to the other two branches, and it's for them to decide. And what
But
this
what does
judge,
that mean? I mean, it sounds nice, but break it down to a regular person. Is that
well,
sounds like legal jargon?
well, in some sense, I mean, right. On most matters of foreign policy, courts are going to be very reluctant to intervene because they don't bear the power of the sword and they don't have the power to declare war. And so, as a general rule, if Congress declares war, the court's not going to come in and say, "Well, you shouldn't have declared it."
They say
Or
that's their power.
right, and if
We're
the
not
president,
involved.
right, if the president as commander in chief decides to drop bombs somewhere, uh, whether we agree with it or not, it's not something the court's going to interfere with. But in this case, they're saying really what we're doing is interpreting a statute, and that is
Mhm.
back to what you said, power of the court is the power to
Mhm.
interpret. Uh, that is a power that we traditionally have exercised, and frankly, we're experts in deciding
Right.
what laws mean and how to interpret them. So they essentially say we're not treating, if this were a case where Congress had declared war on Venezuela, or if this were a case where troops were coming across the border, obviously the court would not be intervening. That would be a political question. The,
Right.
the,
And the
the,
political questions are normally reserved to Congress or the president.
Right, and the most famous case, recent in my lifetime, it's no longer recent as it turns out. But
Maybe not recent to me.
anyway, 1962, Baker versus Carr. For many years, the Supreme Court had decided that matters of state legislative apportionment were political questions that it wouldn't interfere with. And in that case, it said, well, this really isn't a power that's delegated either to Congress or to the president. We have an equal protection clause,
Mm,
and it's not equal if you have districts that are times the size of another and they have the same votes. So
okay.
but usually the political questions they are most likely to be invoked in matters of foreign policy, but not to the extent that the president or anybody else for that matter can say, give an arbitrary meaning to we're at war or what an invasion is, and then expect that the court will lie down and accept it. Now
Mm,
that being said, this is a U.S. district court.
right. It's
It
not even an appellate court. It's
right.
not a district court, a
So
U.S.
there,
Court of
right.
Appeals.
So there are at least two levels that it could go from here: a U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals and then the U.S. Supreme Court. Um, my guess is that I mean I think the decision is fairly sound, uh, but that's the beauty of being the Supreme Court is you get to decide for yourself.
Right. And this is so for this one, it's interesting. It's very similar to the case that we discussed last week,
Yes.
which was the one with the AARP, not the actual organization
Right.
of the AARP, but the initials of
Right.
a plaintiff who was putting forth the request and the petition. So there was that one versus Trump last week that had gotten up to the Supreme Court and was also about the Alien Enemies Act. And that's where the Supreme Court put a preliminary injunction of do not deport these Venezuelans until we figure out what we want to do about it. And that's the
Right.
one where the bus was turned around at the airport.
Right.
This one, as you were describing at the beginning, is also about Venezuelan immigrants who are being held in Texas. They're being
Right.
detained
Right.
pending deportation to another country. And what you're saying is that they've put in habeas corpus requests. What is an actual habeas corpus request?
You're the lawyer. But I believe the Latin means something like what? Produce the body or bring
Yeah.
forth basically a habeas corpus. If you've been arrested, you have the legal right for the government to tell you why you're arrested so that you can challenge it if the reason, if it's because you've run against the mayor and he doesn't like that, chances are you're going to win on habeas corpus.
Yeah, it's basically an attachment of the body where they're
Right.
saying, I am being improperly or illegally detained or imprisoned. And I'm asking the government to produce reasons, sufficient legal reasons as to why I'm held or release me.
Right.
And a lot of this is done through normal prisoners who have gone through due process, who have had trials, have been convicted as they bring habeas corpus actions. But in this case, we don't even have convictions.
That's right.
Of these detainees. We have we have detention of them pending deportation without, and they're claiming just like the other, without due process of law.
Right.
And they're saying, because I haven't had due process, because I haven't had the normal immigration proceedings, I'm being improperly held and detained in a U.S. prison.
And we had another case this last week, and I'm sorry that I don't have the number of that, the name of that, but the Columbia student
Yes.
has been released. He was apparently detained solely on the basis that he's a foreign national who participated in demonstrations against, I believe it was Gaza policy.
Well, I think it was in favor of Palestinians.
Yeah, it got the right, didn't phrase it right, but yes.
Right.
So, Trump is not winning that many of these cases. And here's what's so disconcerting about it is almost every time the president phrases it, much like any prosecutor would.
Yes.
You are, the court has now released back into society murderers and rapists and, enemies of the United States. And here I am trying to support it. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, we need to realize rights are tied together.
Yes.
And, it's easy to say, well, I don't care whether somebody from a foreign country gets due process or not. But if you remember just a week or two ago, and perhaps it was hyperbole, but the president said, well, I would be glad not only to deport foreigners, but I'd be glad to send American prisoners abroad.
Right.
And the next thing you know, it'll be, well, I'll be glad to send any Muslim Americans or any, name your, Japanese Americans, name your group. And in fact, it's generally agreed that one of the worst executive orders in history was an order, and it had support from others, but that Franklin Roosevelt issued during World War II, incarcerating over 100,000 Japanese-born Japanese American citizens on the basis that we could, we didn't know their loyalty or not. And so these are, that they seem like very academic, particularly you talk about political questions and you talk about a law back in 1798 and people think, well, what difference does it make to me? Well, it makes a tremendous, are we going to have the rule of law or are we going to have the rule of kings? And I think we decided 250 years ago, 249 years ago, that we
Right.
were through with a single person making, i- apart from God himself, I
Right.
don't trust any single person to
Agreed.
be making life and death decisions on matters without the guidance of what the courts say and what the Congress has enacted. And
Right.
that's the concern here.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting things. So I'm going to put a pause on it because I do want to talk about these actions of the president against his rivals, against those who disagree with him. So that's where we are right now. But I need a drink, so I'm going to have everybody grab your favorite glass of wine, happy hour drink, and toast to happy hour. Dr. Vile has some water. I have a continuing Moscato d'Asti. Apparently, I have plenty of these in my wine cabinets. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to toast. So everybody drink safely and wisely, but happy hour or morning commute. And let's toast to continuing. But my portion here, and this is going to lead us into the discussion of the Voice of America, PBS, and NPR executive orders, where recently my son's he's a junior in high school and he's been studying World War II. And I was helping him fill out this questionnaire, and we were going through Hitler and Mussolini and all of these others, classic, who are the Axis powers, who are the allies. And we got to the question of the Soviet Union and Russia with Stalin. And we got to the definition of the Great Purge. And I was reading through it, back through it, and I was like, "What is it?" And he's like, "Oh, he killed a lot of people." And, and I'm like, "Oh, I mean, yes, that's
Yeah, oh, nothing.
that's a simple answer." And yes, it's. I mean, if you just say it like that, it doesn't sound too bad. But when you actually think about what you're saying, it's millions of people that were killed,
Yes.
and we were going through. Well, who was it, and who was being purged, and what was happening, and it this little niggle, right, of fear in the back of reading through. Well, Stalin started to get rid of his dissenters,
Yeah.
of anyone who was politically contradictory to him, whoever was disagreeing with his political decisions, whoever was, he would actually go and kill them, right, and quite publicly, so that people would have fear and that they would no longer be dissenting. And then who was next? Well, the people who were creative, right? The artist, the
And Hitler had
press.
done the same thing. Hitler, they're very
Exactly.
similar. Mao
Very
Zedong.
similar.
Yeah.
Where what they were doing, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying anyone here is being, murdered. That I'm not saying that's where we are. I'm not saying Trump is doing this. But the fear there is starting to replicate. Is if we're getting rid of dissenters, if we're putting them out in the public where their reputation is being damaged, where things are happening to them, where we're now minimizing speech, and if you disagree with speech, we're going to get rid of you, minimize the press. And that's where we are now. And Stalin was like, whoever's printing anything against me, well, they've got to go, whether it's a person or the organization. And that's one of my concerns of these new executive orders against specific press coverage and specific organizations that produce, press
Well,
releases
and the
and
same,
TV. And
so you have the same thing. There's a doctrine that I believe is maybe, can't believe, I don't know if it started with Catholic theology or not, but a subsidiary doctrine,
mm,
which is that we have different layers of society. The government, primarily, we think of in terms of national defense, other things that national governments now do. But we have these intermediary institutions,
yes,
churches, schools, universities, colleges, all these other organizations, and we seem perilously close. We used to make a distinction, I guess we still do, between you have democracies and you have dictatorships, but
right,
beyond dictatorships are what we call totalitarian governments,
correct,
where the traditional dictator, all he cared about was staying in power.
yes,
And you gave him power, that was fine. Under totalitarian governments, they want to tell you what to think. They want to tell
yes,
you whether you can believe in God or not.
It's
They can
total control.
Right. They control transportation. They control the media.
Mm.
And what some people see as great energy in the presidency, and we need energy in the presidency. That's
Of course, we need a
yeah,
strong president. We
right.
need energy. We need action.
But when energy comes to I'm going to invade every area of public life, then we have some reason to be cautious. Let me put in a kudos for somebody because there's we talk
Yes,
we whine so much, right?
we do.
WHINE.
Where
But
the H is
it's
optional.
nice to it's nice to give a shout out to someone. There's a really touching article
Mm.
on someone whose name, if I think I'm pronouncing it right, Edwin S. Kneeler, Kneedler, Deputy Solicitor General. He is a 1974 graduate of the University of Virginia Law School. I went to
Amazing.
UVA to graduate school. Um, but he delivered his last case before the Supreme Court. I guess it was Monday or Tuesday earlier this week.
Friday
Uh,
argued it.
yeah, argued his 160th case.
Amazing.
And as he rested his case, Chief Justice Roberts asked him to rise, and he said, "You've just presented your 160th argument before this court. I understand it's intended to be your last. This is a record for modern times. You have carried out your responsibility with extraordinary care and professionalism, conscious of your role not only as an advocate, and this is important, but as an officer of the court."
Mm.
So here's, and they had actually argued a case together. Roberts had before the Supreme
Oh my
Court a few
goodness.
cases, but um, applause filled the courtroom gallery. People rose to their feet, and trying to see who they're. I'm reading an article here that was published, I believe, in the UVA magazine,
Okay.
but it says, yes, okay. I'm not aware of anyone in recent history getting a standing ovation from the court, and think Ed was entirely deserving one, said Zia Wang, the director of the law school's Supreme Court litigation clinic. He's going to be missed. And I thought, here's an individual apparently who understands that even when you're arguing a government case, you have to confess error. If you find out that you've,
Absolutely.
or you find out facts that have been suppressed, you need to do it. And apparently, this man was one who upheld that principle. And as you know, I
Mm.
have books on great American lawyers and great American judges, and I'm a little well, I don't know
He
when
would
I
be a new update.
well, he would definitely be somebody who would be recognized. And then I don't know what the reading habits of your audience are, but probably most people are familiar with C.S. Lewis. Um,
Should be. He's
he,
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
that's right, but also a very good scholar. He was Oxford and then moved to Cambridge. And
He
I have a
also, if I may pause real quick, he also his contribution to Christian
absolutely, he was a Christian.
doctrine and not necessarily literature. Yes, fiction in the sense of
Yes,
the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series, but also his books, Mere Christianity,
right. Which started
others.
out as a series of lectures during World War II, radio
Right,
lectures. He was a good friend, by the way, and influenced J.R.R. Tolkien.
Lord of
Uh,
the Rings.
they were right. They were in a group called the Inklings, along with some other literary figures. And I have a friend, Hal Poe, Harry Lee Poe is actually his complete name, who just retired from Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, and he has written uh, a 3 volume. And see, I don't know what the book as a whole is called. I have just finished. Well, maybe. Anyway, I've just finished 2 of 3 volumes. I'm just getting ready to start the volume that deals with 1945 to 1963, and it is if anybody has any interest in literature or
Yeah,
Christianity or C.S. Lewis as a writer or even Tolkien.
biographies.
Yeah, it's really a great it's a great read. I'm learning a lot. By the way, and I haven't gotten to this part in the book, and so I hope that I'm remembering it right. But do you remember what day C.S. Lewis died?
Is this the Easter one again?
No, no,
Okay, no, then I don't.
that's the Pope or
That
close
that
to
was the
Easter.
Pope, and was it who was the other one we just talked about it?
Oh
Was it
yeah,
Jefferson?
well, no, that would not fit Jefferson. Jackson. It wasn't
Jackson.
Easter. It was Sunday. But yes,
Okay.
Stonewall Jackson. But if I remember correctly, he died on the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated,
Oh my goodness.
and
Okay.
I think as a result, the news was pretty much dominated by Kennedy's death rather than Lewis's. But
Of course.
he's a great 20th century figure, and he's particularly important in uh, and I'm a Christian, so I like that part
Of
of it. But
course.
someone, Christian or not, who integrates his faith into his studies and wasn't a slouch with either.
Right.
And that's one of my goals in life is to be able to do
Yeah.
both. But I think uh, again, there's 3 volumes, and I think I bought the whole set for through Amazon for maybe $80 to $90.
Nice.
Got free delivery and whatever, but it's and it has. I wish your readers, I wish I could have them touch the cover,
Okay.
the paper cover, and I can't quite explain it, but it's almost like a vinyl. It has some real texture to it, and
Nice.
it's real. I'm a little jealous because none of my books have that on it.
Ask your
Anyway,
publishers next time.
I will have to do so. Anyway, great
Yeah, no, and
books.
you got me. I'm glad you had a little bit extra after there. You got me a little choked up with the discussion about the attorney, the deputy
Well,
solicitor general. It's extremely touching. As an attorney, it does tear me up, choke me up a little bit. It's amazing to have. I've never argued a case before the Supreme Court. I'm not an appellate attorney. I could be, but I'm not. That hasn't been my practice. It's been trial litigation at the basic the trial level. But I have such respect for anyone who argues before the Supreme Court, especially one who's argued 160 times, and to be recognized nationally by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and to have a standing ovation in the Supreme Court is just absolutely amazing. What any attorney would aspire to for respect, for admiration, for professionalism, and for work with their own ethics. It's very
and
touching.
let me raise another point here, and I don't want to end up sullying this discussion because it's so good,
Of course.
but this is why so many of us are concerned about the politicization of the Justice Department, the Attorney
Agreed.
General. Now, presidents typically, I mean, John F. Kennedy actually appointed his brother as Attorney General. So
Right.
I'm not saying that there's been an immaculate conception there throughout history.
There's some
Right.
nepotism.
But um, the Attorney General's office has always been understood as not an office. It's not designed to go after presidential enemies, to invest, investigate, the brother or the son of someone, just because they're your political enemy.
Right.
And what this applause shows, I think, for the Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court, over the long term, I mean, the same is going to be true of an attorney general. They're much more
Yes.
likely to accept the validity of cases by someone that they know has been truthful and that they
Yes.
know has acted as an agent of the court rather than someone that they see simply as a partisan advocate. So
Correct.
he really did, it's a great example for fellow lawyers and others to
Yeah.
follow.
And that is the concern that I go back to is the political dissenters who are the first to be, purged in one way or another is the political dissenters. So
Well, and
that's where I see NPR and PBS and the Voice of America is these media outlets have allowed publication and presentation of dissent against the president. And to me, that's why they've been, been specifically attacked in the executive orders. But Dr. Weil, I'd love for you for this specific portion to tell us what exactly is in the executive orders for these 3 media outlets.
okay, so basically we've had a decision in the last week on Voice of America.
Correct.
Well, actually, and here, may I refer your listeners to, if they want to keep up with what's happening dealing with the First Amendment, if they will go to the First Amendment
Yes.
Encyclopedia. We have literally, I wrote an addition to one today, and we have some others. But
It's free online, and it's
right,
published through Middle Tennessee State University.
yep, just First Amendment Encyclopedia, and you can put in, and they're all cross references. They all have bibliographies. They are as nonpartisan, I think, as anything that you could find. We try to present all views, but we have two major sort of events that we're talking about. The Voice of America is actually part of a larger network. It's broadcasts that are sent into nations that do not have First Amendment freedom of the press. And it's a form of what political scientists call soft power. And soft, we know what hard power is. It's when you bomb the heck out of somebody, or
Right.
invade them, or
It's clear we're going after you.
Right. We know what that is. But
Yeah.
soft power is, it's something I think a lot of Americans don't understand. Foreign aid. Why do we care if people are starving in Africa? Well, we ought to care because they're fellow human beings.
Of course.
But quite apart from that, we know that when people starve, uh, they tend to create revolutions, and more than that, we want people. It's like a brand. Why do some brands give to support national parks or
Right.
to look for missing children? Well, they do it because it gives a nice warm fuzzy feeling. You're more you're less likely to get to war against someone who's giving you uh,
Aid.
money to keep people from dying of AIDS than you are from somebody who says, well, what business is that of ours? And
Right.
Voice of America is very similar to this. And basically, Trump came in, he fired over about 1,000 people, most of whom were journalists. And they took it to court, and the court said, hey, Congress has appropriated this money. You don't have the power unilaterally to suspend it. And this came up during the Nixon administration. There was policy known as rescission, which is Congress would appropriate money and the president would say,
Right.
well, I don't think you need money for that. So he just wouldn't spend it.
And this is very similar to the getting rid of USAID, is the appropriation
exactly.
of funds that we've talked about on this program.
Exactly. Congress has appropriated money. Well, probably the best example, if you want to get to something that's we haven't discussed but is directly in line with policy, is in the Biden administration, Obama, and perhaps then some Republican administrations, you had money set aside for climate change, a study
Right.
of climate change, how to mitigate it. Well, take a better example, which is related, is we have money that is given to, is it Homeland Security? I don't know if it's Homeland Security or there's a national disaster, but there's a group that comes in when there's a tornado or there's a hurricane or whatever. And Trump is now telling states, well,
This is FEMA.
right, yeah, FEMA. That's what I was looking for. We're not going to cover these cases unless they involve X percent of the population and X millions of dollars. Now, one could argue that states should, in fact, be the first responders, first line of defense,
Of course.
in many cases. But some disasters are so widespread, and some, if they are in fact caused by climate change, or instead of saying cause, if they're exacerbated by climate change, then you have particular areas of the country that are being disproportionately impacted by policies that affect the nation as a whole.
Sure.
And so, Congress adopted a law during the Nixon administration limiting rescissions, and Trump seems to be pretty much riding roughshod over them right now. So he's decided, and I'm not really sure. In the case of A Voice of America, I think part of it is just sort of a general retrenchment. he feels that other nations, why should we hear what happens in other nations? It's America first. The answer, of course, is soft power is America first.
Absolutely.
But
And it's promoting democracy in other nations.
that's right. Now, PBS and NPR, they're a little bit different. I mean, they are now, and let's back up a minute. Most of their funding, I think it's 85%, actually comes from private donations.
Sure.
My wife and I contribute to
I've
these.
contributed to PBS and WETA. I love their programming.
Yeah,
I love British shows. So
yeah.
anything that has British shows, I end up doing subscriptions for. So yeah, similar.
So, you know, I listen fairly regularly to, particularly to NPR, if I'm on an extended, as you know, anytime there was a road trip.
We listen to it
Yeah,
constantly.
everybody else, their kids know music. Mine know or used to know news.
Well, the funniest part was when we were on the long road trips together, my dad, um, we would have it on so much that by the third time it ran through, I could even cite the same news article that they were discussing. It's like, oh, well, this is this one, and everyone has to know, as a fun little fact about you, the only time I know that you've gotten pulled over while driving was while listening to NPR, and your excuse to the officer as to why you were either distracted or speeding was you got distracted by the NPR discussion that was on. Is that right?
I think that's correct. Yes.
The only person in
Yes.
America. And of course, you look like the professor that you are. The police
Yeah.
officer took one look at you, had never heard anyone say, I was distracted by NPR,
Yeah.
and let you move on with a warning.
I don't remember the warning part. I think it may have been a ticket. But in any event. Um, so the other so NPR and PBS,
PBS.
right? They're private organizations. I think they get about 15%. And basically, in an order that the president issued on May 2nd, I believe it is, he
That's today.
well, then it must have been yesterday. So it was
May
May
1st, probably
1st.
May 1st.
I have it here somewhere because I had to do it for this article that I was revising.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, he says he actually doesn't state the doctrine, but he uses a doctrine of called government speech, which is that if the government is speaking on its own authority, it can say what it has the right to decide what it wants to say. Trump Trump does not have to give equal time to people who say, "Well, this immigrant is a good person." He can just make whatever accusations he wants, pretty much get by with it. Because a city can say we're going to proclaim this to be Columbus Day rather than Native American Day.
Sure.
It's as I understand, it's the government making the speech so they can make the speech they want. But the problem with that is, so he basically says the government is entitled to have, to choose what it wants, and we want biased, fair speech.
Unbiased,
I'm sorry,
fair speech.
unbiased, fair speech. And he believes, I think again, because they do tend to give, a platform to people on all sides. He thinks because everything is not pro-Trump, that therefore the taxpayers have no right paying for it. I
So what
think,
he's done through the executive order is he's, as I understand it, gotten rid of all federal funding for PBS and NPR.
well, I don't know that he will succeed.
But that's the
Succeed.
executive order.
Right. The executive order is basically to cut off all governmental support. Now, what's interesting is Congress apparently gives a 2-year appropriation to these, and they do it for the very reason that we need it, which is they do it to insulate it from partisan influence. And so,
Right.
whether he can retract something that has, and again, this is money that was appropriated by Congress.
Exactly.
So, if you will remember, there is a great movie about our friend. Why am I going to forget his name? Right, Mr. Rogers. How can we forget?
Yes.
If you've
Yes.
seen documentary. There's two, right? There's a
A
film.
Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is one of them. One's the documentary and one's the film with Tom Hanks that
Right.
is a
Right.
biographical movie.
Right. And in the former, if I recall, they have him before Congress, and
Yes.
they are considering whether to continue funding of public, I guess it's public television.
Correct. The
And
public broadcasting
right. And one of the
network.
programs is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And he practically has people in tears when he describes, how much he loves children and what he believes this program has done for them.
Right.
And I don't remember if he got a standing ovation for it, but
There
the
were
congressman in the
senators who
end,
were crying.
yeah, I mean, there were
Grown men.
one of the congressmen, basically said, well, you sure made the case to us.
Yeah, you just
Uh,
got your funding.
right.
Mhm.
So, and not to be fair, not every program on PBS or NPR is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood,
Of course.
but they do still have children's programming. My guess is if this order goes through, if he succeeds in withdrawing funding, it sounds as though probably most urban networks that are pretty well funded and have a fair number of viewers, contributors, probably will continue. Where it will probably hit most are in rural areas
Right.
where there's limited radio coverage. Now, one argument that is sort of interesting and I wish I had it in front. Well, maybe I do have it in front of me here. No, I have pages 3 and 4 instead of 1 and 2. But one of the arguments that the president makes is that in 1967, I think he says, when the corporation was established, he says there weren't nearly as many media outlets as there are today.
Sure.
And so he starts basically by saying we don't need it, and then he says not only do we not need it, but they're biased and prejudiced, so we ought to get rid of it. I suspect that there will be as much pushback on this as many of the other initiatives. And the whole problem with executive orders, to go back to what we said earlier, executive orders can be overturned by the next president.
Exactly.
Now, if you've been fired and you're out of a job for 2 years or 4, it may be very difficult to reconstruct it. But executive orders are a second rate measure of quasi legislating of dubious constitutional value.
Right.
And, they're not the kind of continuity that one typically wants in government.
Right. And the concern for me on this particular issue is the assumption of, well, the programming is all biased, or because
Right.
a portion of the programming is biased against me as Trump and my administration and my views and ideologies, well, then we're going to cut it out one way or the other. We'll reduce funding so much that they cannot survive. So he's not saying we're getting rid of these programs, but he is saying we're taking this money away.
Right.
And just like USAID, well, what does that leave people? If there's no money, how do they continue to operate? Right. And it's also very similar in my mind and a lot of people's minds of what is happening with the Washington Post. Now, that hasn't been an executive order, but this, national newspaper of the Washington Post, which is online and in print, where the owner says, we're not going to publish any opinions that are anti-Trump. We're only going to put opinions in the newspaper that are pro-Trump. And I cannot tell you how many people in my area, I'm in the DMV, Washington, D.C. area, and so many of the people that I know have canceled their subscriptions.
Well, and this
to the
is
Washington
the newspaper.
Post.
This is the newspaper that published the information that brought down Richard Nixon.
Yes.
And we probably never would have known about the abuses that were going on were it not for 2 intrepid and other reporters from the Washington Post. So, and we let, when we talked about our deputy solicitor general, we missed a point which we've mentioned in previous broadcasts, which is Trump is also putting great pressure on law firms.
Yes.
That, if you're opposing governmental policies, then we're not going to let you in government buildings.
Correct.
And
Which
unless
prevents you from doing any federal
right,
cases.
right, and we're not going to uh, we're not going to hire any of your people if they leave your firms, and you're going to have to give us pro bono work. You
For
know,
our administration.
for our administration, you're going to have to represent the government without pay. Well, that is not the American way. I'm sorry.
Get rid of our political dissenters.
Well, again,
It's,
law, media, yes,
yeah. All right. So on that exciting and fun note, right? This
yes.
uplifting note. One
Well,
uplifting
remember
note
our
that we're
deputy.
gonna yes.
Remember Edwin Needler. Yes, I guess
Needler, Kevin or Edwin Needler. Remember
yes,
him and C.S. Lewis. Those are our uplifting notes of the
yes,
day. But also do keep in mind this underlying concern of getting rid of political dissent, getting rid of First Amendment freedoms and the press and the media, and also the illegal immigrants. Not that some shouldn't be deported, not that we shouldn't go through that procedure, but there is due process. There is this political question doctrine. Now there's this government speech doctrine. So think about it. Really think about where it applies and where it doesn't. You can certainly dissent from us. Not that we love it. It doesn't feel good, but it's your right. Right? It's your First Amendment freedom. You don't have to agree with us. Have a different opinion, post the different opinion. That gets everyone talking. And that's the point, is to have the different opinions, to compare them, to contrast them, to have the talking points, because that's our right. So certainly no threats. That's definitely not a right. That's a crime. But otherwise, check us out. Like, subscribe to our channel. Listen for the next time. If you subscribe, that will make sure that we pop up and continuous, and also get it out to other potential viewers and listeners. We do appreciate your support. Go to thelawunscripted.com. There you can see our own legal cases. We have another podcast called The Law Unscripted that talks about all the things you didn't know about the law and some of these specific types of things like the political question doctrine. We also have legal programs that help review for the bar with the 8 subjects that are the core subjects in the law, including criminal law and constitutional law. So check those out, buy any of those programs, and check out our merchandise. That's our fun and uplifting part, is we've got a lot of funny legal sayings on coffee tumblers as well as t-shirts. So check that out. And we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.